Good evening, everyone. We're just going to give a minute for people to come in out of the waiting room here. Welcome, everybody, to our Fall Howard Center Speaker Series at the Philip Merrill College of Journalism here at the University of Maryland. We'll just give it another few seconds as people are trickling in. All right, so good evening, everybody. My name is Katie Auney. I'm the Chief Development Officer and Assistant Dean for External Relations for the Philip Merrill College of Journalism at the University of Maryland. And again, welcome to our fall speaker series presented by the Howard Center for Investigative Journalism. The Howard Center was founded at the University of Maryland in the fall of 2018. Thanks to a grant from the Scripps Howard Foundation. And we are very thrilled to have with us tonight a great panel to talk about the use of visual forensics in investigations. I'm going to turn things over right away to our data editor, Sean Mussenden. Sean is the data editor for the Howard Center, and he's going to serve as our moderator for this evening. And he's going to go ahead and introduce our wonderful panelists that we have with us this evening and get things going. Just a couple quick housekeeping notes before I do, though. We are recording this and we will have the link available up on the college's YouTube channel tomorrow. So if you miss part of it or you want to share with anybody, we will have that link available. We also do encourage you to ask questions, either using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen or by placing questions into the chat. Our panelists and moderator will be checking both. So feel free to drop your questions in either place throughout the program, and they will try to get to those as they go along. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Sean. Sean, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Katie. Welcome, everybody. Really excited to be here with you tonight. We have a great presentation for you and some really excellent journalists who are going to talk about their work. So this is investigative reporting with visual forensics and open source information. And what we're hoping to do tonight is to show you how investigative journalists are increasingly using digital forensics reporting methods and open source information to tell important local, national, and international stories. So people who do this work use publicly available information. Sometimes it's private, we'll talk about it, but mostly publicly available information like satellite imagery or flight tracking data or terabytes of cell phone videos that have been posted to social media, security camera data, to reconstruct newsworthy events or to find newsworthy information that needs to be aired to a wider audience. So some of the things our panelists have done, and some of which they'll talk about tonight, really they're leading practitioners of this emerging approach to reporting, and they've produced some really excellent work on topics like the war in Ukraine, the school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, civilian executions in Africa, the January 6th assault on the Capitol, and as we'll hear tonight, a Baltimore woman's quest to find who stole $3,000 in food assistance benefits. So with me are our panelists. We've got three great people for you tonight. Brenna Smith is an investigative reporter with the Baltimore Banner. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Banner, it's a brand new nonprofit news organization based in Baltimore that has been doing some truly remarkable work, despite being open, I think, for like less than 6 months, maybe a year. Brenna was previously a visual investigations fellow with the Times, and Brenna, I'll throw this plug in. I'm a subscriber to the Banner, and if you care about Maryland news and local news, please subscribe. We'll drop a link for you in the chat. Joyce Lee is a visual forensics reporter with the Washington Post. I'm guessing most of you are familiar with the Washington Post, but if not, it's one of the world's leading news organization. Also a subscriber to that one. And finally, we have Giancarlo Fiorella, who is a senior investigator and a trainer with Bellingcat. Some of you may be familiar with Bellingcat, but for those of you who are hearing about that for the first time, Bellingcat is a cool organization. It's an independent collective of researchers, investigators, and citizen journalists who use open source and social media investigation techniques to probe a variety of subjects. They've been a real pioneer in the space, and so we're excited to have Giancarlo with us tonight. Okay, so in a few minutes, we're gonna have each of our panelists show you a story they worked on and talk about some of the methodology and the approaches that went into it and how these techniques informed it. But to get started, I think what I'd like us to do is help everybody understand what we talk about when we use terms like digital forensics or visual forensics or visual investigations or reporting with open source information. What I'm hoping we can, each of you can talk about, and Brenna, I'll start with you, is, when you think of this work, how do you define this space? Is it a specific approach to storytelling? Is it a reporting mindset? Is it a set of methodological skills for information gathering? Is it something else entirely?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I think those are all really great questions. And I think one of the only things I don't like about this type of reporting is the fact that there can be these words like open source intelligence and visual forensics and visual investigations that are kind of intimidating and not always super intuitive, and can make it seem like we're all like way more fancy and frankly smarter than we are. But what the space really is a type of reporting that is totally new and breaking new ground, and also a type of reporting that journalists have been doing since the beginning of this profession. So what, to think about this space, I kind of think about it in two distinct ways. There's the open source intelligence space, which is just basically meaning any sort of publicly available information. But specifically how that publicly available information has been revolutionized because of the internet and recent technology. So, public records, for example, that's open source intelligence, but that's been around for a while. And when people really talk about OSINT, a lot of times what they really mean is this idea of sleuthing online, using social media, satellite imagery, other publicly available sources that you can't just go to a courthouse and get. It's really internet based. Through open source intelligence, there was kind of a brand of reporting that sprung from it, which, Joyce actually does for her day job, so I'll let her talk about it more. But when I was a fellow at the visual investigations team at the Times, and they're reporting the backbone of a lot of that was open source intelligence. But what they would do is they would take visuals and videos and imagery and information that they would find through OSINT means, and then they would, show it to the world in a visual medium where the visuals from the OSINT findings were key investigative findings in and of themselves. The visuals weren't there to just be pretty. They weren't there for B-roll. They are there to tell investigative findings. So yeah, a lot of times the space can seem a little like Mr. Robot-y, and I promise you it's not. I mean, take your most determined sorority girl stalking a guy she just met, and she's just as good as any open source investigator there is out there. So it really is, again, like a technique that's been around forever, and it's just kind of evolving now with the internet.
Joyce, do you have anything to add on that following on Brenna?
No, I think, well, thank you so much for having us. I think Brenna summed it up so eloquently just now. And I particularly agree with what she had to say about, your average sorority girl looking up a date. I feel like it's just so common, and really like almost common sense, I guess, in a way, having grown up on the internet. I think, just to echo what she said, for my team, I think visual forensics, which I think, echoing what Brenna said, it's really just, it's really not, I wouldn't put too much stock in the word like forensics or that. I think it's a team name, but really for us, it's about our approach to reporting, that the first thing we look for in the story is trying to determine whether there are visuals available. And then going from there, like, are there new visuals to uncover? Or if we take the visuals together and look at it in a different light, are there more analyses that can be done? Are there more findings that we can take away from that? And then the final thing, obviously, is if we were to publish the findings from our visual analysis reporting, will that have impact? Will that add a layer of accountability to what's out there? So really, for us, it's just all about like going with the visuals first and using that as a lens to approach stories.
Giancarlo, how do you all think of it at Bellingcat? How does this form your work?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me here. I would say, yeah, I mean, Brenna and Joyce hit a lot of the points that I would hit when asked this question. The one thing I would add is that for us at Bellingcat, in particular, open source research has an important facet to it that has to do with the relationship, not just of the researcher with the data, but also of the people who are producing the data. So what I mean is that, just to give an example, Bellingcat is working a lot right now on Ukraine and documenting potential war crimes in Ukraine. And it used to be that in order for you to get an image from a conflict zone, you had to wait for some big organization, to send a journalist over and a film crew and have them, then broadcast those images on the news, and then you would watch them that way. But now you don't have to wait for journalists to report from conflict zones from anywhere, really, because lots and lots of people have really good quality cameras on them at all times and their cell phones. And if you have an internet connection, you can be a reporter. So there's a kind of, so again, to go back to this idea of like, what is an open source digital investigation? Everything that Brenna and Joyce said was on point. But there's that element there that involves the fact that this information, a lot of the times, is being produced by ordinary people who are not journalists, and also it is being researched by people like me who also aren't journalists. And so that is a sort of a really interesting and as I said at the beginning, a very important facet of this for us at Bellingcat.
The speed at which the information these things are based on, at which it becomes available, seems like a really important factor. I mean, even something that is not created by individuals, like satellite imagery, a lot of it is available quickly, right? Within 24 hours, and increasingly high quality and increasingly available to the public. Okay, so thanks for that. I think it's going to help us to look at a couple examples of some stories to get a sense of not just the kinds of things that are possible, but some of the methodological work. And I think a lot of the audience will be really surprised maybe to see how much painstaking work goes into verification on these things. So Giancarlo, I'm going to go ahead and share, and let me do that. And then you can take it away.
Oh, great, thank you. So I'm going to talk about, so about 5 minutes. I'm going to try to rush as much as, no, not rush through it. I'm going to try to get through it quickly. This is an investigation that we worked on last year, a couple of us at Bellingcat with investigative partners at the BBC Africa Eye Unit, which is an open source research unit at the BBC, as well as with NewSee, which is an organization based in the US that with which we've worked for a number of years doing open source research. And so what I want to talk to you about now with this example from this investigation is how you would use image verification methodologies for conflict reporting. And so this has to do with a series of 5 videos that surfaced on Telegram back in March of 2021. We found these videos online. Telegram, if you're not familiar with it, is a chat app. It's sort of like WhatsApp in a way, very popular in certain parts of the world. And these videos, unfortunately, showed a massacre. So they showed a group of soldiers checking civilians. Clearly, the civilians were being detained. And a couple of the videos showed the soldiers executing the civilians and throwing their bodies off of a cliff. And the videos had been recorded seemingly by one of the perpetrators of this massacre. And when the video surfaced online, there was some discussion online. There were people who were saying that it had been recorded in one particular place, and with other people who were saying it had been recorded somewhere else. Generally, the commentary was that it had come from Ethiopia. Generally, the commentary was that it had come from Tigray, which is a region in Ethiopia. And we were seeing comments that had been recorded near a place called Moderator, which is a town in the Tigray region of Ethiopia. If we could go to the next slide there, thank you so much. So again, from the perspective of conflict reporting and thinking about what Brenna was saying, how this is simultaneously kind of very new, but also sort of not so new. I guess in the sense that insofar as it is a new thing, what an open source digital investigation can allow you to do is have access immediately to parts of the world to which you might not have physical access. And that's the case with Tigray. If you're not familiar with the conflict, it's been going on for a couple of years now. The Tigray region under non-war circumstances was a very remote one. It's hard to access it, but in particular, after the war broke out in 2020, the government blocked essentially all access to it. So if you're a journalist, you really couldn't get in. There's been an internet shutdown that's been in effect for a while, and that made the flow of information out of Tigray impossible. And so under those conditions, it's very difficult to send, or impossible to send, something like a reporting crew to go to Moderator, find out where it is, and try to determine what happened. So what I want to show you with this example here is how much information, how much you can uncover without having to go to this place that you're researching on. So if you could go to the next slide. Thank you so much, Sean. I won't show you the videos, obviously, because they're quite graphic. When you're doing a visual verification, that is when you're trying to determine where and when a video was recorded or an image was recorded, you just have to watch it a lot. And so we watched every frame of these 5 videos dozens of times, backwards and forwards, looking for any clue that we could find that could help us determine where this video was taken. Again, we had some indication that it was in Tigray. We had some indication that it was around Moderator, but the purpose of image verification is to verify, as the name suggests, to be 100% sure where the footage was recorded. So what we did was we watched all of the videos, and we looked for any clue that would help us to make that determination. So if you, sorry, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, okay. So the previous image was a composite of just 2 frames of the video. Anybody can do that. You just take 2 screenshots, you overlay them with GIMP, which is a free program. That helped us to sort of gain a broader sort of panorama of what we were looking at. And in this screenshot here, the zoomed in version of the previous screen that we saw, we see some of the soldiers who are standing there. And what they're doing is they're walking the civilians to that cliff edge there where they're going to be executed. So how do you know, how can you determine where this video was taken? As I said, you watch it over and over and over again. In this frame, there are lots of clues that can help us that eventually actually led us precisely to the spot. So these clues were the following. First of all, we know that it's an arid place. Okay, so it's not a forest, right? It's somewhere that's relatively arid. We also know that there are mountains in the background, so this can help us to determine where the video was taken, if we can match them to satellite imagery, for example, as we're going to do in a little bit. We also, after watching the footage, guessed that this had happened on top of a plateau or a mesa, right? So you can see how there's clearly a cliff there, but the mountains are flat, so that's what's called a plateau or a mesa. And we also knew that, or rather we had the theory, this is a little bit technical, but if you just bear with me for a second, we had the theory that the sun was low in the horizon because you can tell by their long shadows, right? So you see how the people are casting long shadows. So what that meant was that the sun had to be relatively low in the horizon, which in turn meant that the sun was either in the east or the west, which in turn meant that we were looking roughly in this image either north or south. What that told us was that this cliff that you see here, that sort of it's like a half moon that goes to the left of the image and then across the middle of it, that shape had to run roughly north and south. Okay, so we were looking for a cliff that had a sort of a half moon shape that ran north and south. I'm going through this really quickly But those were the kind of the big clues. And, you know, I'm explaining it in a minute, but it took us, you know, 3 days to sort of come up with these ideas. And so then what we did was, none of us had ever looked at Tigray, and I certainly had never looked at Tigray on a map. I had no idea if it was arid or not. I had no idea if it had mesas or not. When we went to Google Earth Pro, which is one of the most important tools for open source research, if we can go to the next slide, Sean. Thank you. We noticed that there were lots of mesas around Mabere Dago. So finding Mabere Dago was tricky, first of all, because it's a small town in a very remote part of the world. It wasn't on Google Maps, so we had to figure out a way to find it. Once we had found it, we noticed, as I said, and as you can see there, that there were lots of plateaus. So we said, okay, maybe those hints that we were looking at online are actually good leads, and it's possible that this massacre actually took place around here. So then what we did was we drew search areas on Google Earth Pro. If you've never used it before, it's a free tool, you can download it. And we looked at all of the plateaus around Mabere Dago, and we sort of split them up. And we said, okay, Jake, you're taking these ones, and Alium, you're doing these ones, and then Giancarlo, you're gonna check these ones. And immediately, you know, because we only have a limited amount of time, and, you know, we can't check every single one, we went with our theory again, that we had to look for a cliff that was running roughly north and south. And so in the next slide, just to give you an idea, for example, in this plateau here, you can just kind of immediately hone in on the ones that are running north and south. So if you hit enter there, Sean, the ones that are highlighted in green, you can see roughly run north and south. So those are the ones that we would be checking. And we would eliminate all the 2 that run east and west, like the top, if you hit enter again, you'll see, so those ones we would say, okay, for the sake of time, let's skip those. Let's just focus on the green areas. And so what this process looks like is you just go on Google Earth Pro and you click on the ground a lot, and then you kind of get a panorama of what the place looks like. And eventually we found a spot that seemed to match the view that we were getting in the videos. And the spot is roughly in the center of the image there. And if you hit enter again, I think it will take us to that. Yeah. And then, sorry, just one more time. Maybe, oh yeah. So what we were able to do was determine that the X that you see there is roughly where the video had been recorded, and then those lines indicate the field of view of the camera. And so if you go to the next slide, that's what the area looks like on Google Earth Pro. So when you park your camera on Google Earth Pro, that's what you would see. And of course, it's not a perfect rendering. It's Google Earth Pro has a lot of limitations, and you can't, you know, it doesn't like perfectly match the terrain. But there were enough features here that told us that this was probably the spot. We wanted to get a second opinion, so we went to another free tool. It is called Peak Visor, and it's for people who like hiking. And what we were able to do was check the same location on Peak Visor. And if you skip ahead, I think 2 slides there, Sean. Oh, yeah, there we go. That's the one. So on Peak Visor, that's what the area looked like. And once we saw that image, we were able to be like really, really confident that this is the correct spot. I think we can probably share the article in the chat. If you look at the article, there's more detailed graphics that more sort of accurately match the terrain. But I just wanted to show you Peak Visor here because just to give you an idea of the thought process, you know, we went to Google Earth Pro, we were like 95% sure, but you never want to be 95% sure. You want to get to 100 if possible. Once we went to Peak Visor and we checked the terrain, we said, yeah, this is the correct spot. I think this is probably the last slide. And if that's the case, I will conclude by saying that, you know, we did this from 10,000 kilometers away. We had never been to Tigray. We were able to determine exactly, precisely point to the spot where this massacre took place. That allowed us to make a publication. We were the first international media organization to report on this. CNN, I think the New York Times, maybe not. I know CNN also reported on this. Amnesty International also reported on it. And due to the power of this sort of investigative methodology, these open source investigative techniques that I've showed you, we were able to call attention to this crime, and eventually got the Ethiopian embassy to release a statement acknowledging that this had happened and they were looking into it. I'm sorry if I went long, but I'll just stop talking there.
Super interesting. Thank you. I know this is the kind of thing you all do all the time, but it blows my mind seeing that process. Okay, so Joyce, we're gonna go to you. You're gonna talk about a very different story that was here in the U.S. So let me pull up that. Okay.
Got it.
All right. Can you you can see this, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think probably many people followed this story when it unfolded. It was at Travis Scott's Astroworld concert in Texas, where there were quite a few deaths, and we wanted to unpack why. So if you could go to the next slide. So what we start with every project that we do really is we start by gathering all the visuals that we can find online, whether that's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and we sort of cast a really wide net. And so once we have those videos, we'll put them into a video database that's shared. So if you see, these columns, there have been different iterations of the database of this sheet, but what we typically always have is a video ID, whether it's been verified, licensed, the terms of the licensing, the start date and time, the duration, and then, depending on what things that we're looking for, it'll include other columns as well. And then we'll have the lat and long. And so for here, I think the other element that we don't do for every story, but it's very useful to do if you have the information and the video, is create a video sync. And what I mean by that, and you'll see a screenshot here, is we'll take all the videos and we'll try to compare them to each other and figure out whether we can put them in space and time. And so we'll say, okay, this video was taken here, but it was taken at the same time this person was filming in this other part of the concert area. And so you put them together and you get sort of, like, depending on how much material you have a 360 perspective. And so for this Travis Scott concert, we got really lucky because there was an Apple Music live stream. And we also then had a list of the songs that were going to be performed. And then just based on what you hear in the videos, you can say, okay, this probably took place around this time, and then use the audio to really sync it up together. So we have an understanding of the videos that we have exactly when it unfolded. So next slide. And then we did very similar to what Giancarlo just described, is trying to figure out what was taken where. And so some of those were just photos, others were really, really quick videos. And so then we took composites, we took screenshots and created composites like this, and then comparing this to each other, we were able to figure out, okay, this took place in one quadrant. And if you go to the next slide, I think I can sort of explain what I meant by that. So one of our very talented graphics reporters created this layout of the concert venue. And so this green line in the center over here, I wonder if I can annotate it. Yes, exactly.
Right there.
Yeah. So that's the concert stage. Ooh, go back.
Ooh, yep.
No worries. And then the red lines that you see here, those were the barriers in the configuration. And then we loosely called it different quadrants. So north, south, west, east. And we said, okay, these are sort of like loosely where people were congregated around. And so basically we had the sync. We had this accurate concert venue map that our reporter Atar built using imagery of the area. And then we had the videos. And so we went frame by frame in each of the videos and said, okay, where does it look like there seems to be the most distress? That, as it turns out, was concentrated in the south quadrant. And then we looked through the videos and said, okay, sorry, a little bit higher up, Sean.
A little bit higher, kind of right here.
Exactly. Yep. And then we looked at the videos and said, okay, can we identify any of the known victims in this footage, and so on and so forth. And from there on, if you go to the next slide, we were able to identify that most of the victims were in fact in the south quadrant. And so, we of course didn't just say, of course we had our suspicions about where they were, but then the other part of this that isn't open source, but is, I think, as Brenna talked about earlier, was just traditional reporting. We had, a reporter working with us on our rapid response investigative desk, and one of our own reporters as well, calling families, getting in touch with lawyers, just to determine that we would say, okay, we think this person may have been here. Is there anything that you could help us, that you could provide or share with us to corroborate this information? And so that's how we arrived at these locations. And so we've isolated that the South Quadrant was where there was essentially the deadliest quadrant. If you go to the next slide. And so then we want to understand exactly how this happens. Like, how does something, and I think this is what we're seeing in South Korea as well. It's just a question of crowd crush, crowd density. It's terrifying and it's deadly, but how does it happen? And so we, in this case, we went to a couple of different experts. One expert that we've worked with before, his name is Frenik, and he is a physicist. And so he looked at this Apple TV live stream for us, and and he looked at this particular area, and he said, okay, if you were to isolate the movements of some of these people, you'll see that they're moving roughly in the same direction, which indicates to us that the individuals in the crowd have lost control of their bodies, right? They're not moving in the same direction intentionally together. They're at the whim of the crowd, which is why you're seeing this sort of like uniform movement of these people. So essentially we're just a wave. You don't have control over your body, your bodily movements at that point. And then if you go to the next slide, and then the other element that we need to understand is crowd density. And so we worked with researchers at Carnegie Mellon University to understand crowd density analysis. And so essentially what that tells us is how many people are in, I guess, a square feet, and how much space you have around you. And that can tell us, when things get deadly, essentially. And so we were able to determine, based on the videos and the screenshots that we provided to Carnegie Mellon University, that at some points, like, the crowd became so dense that people weren't able to breathe, because you literally don't have space for your lungs to expand. And so obviously, like, this was before the autopsy reports came out, so we couldn't say for certain that that's what that was. But, we were able to say, okay, like, at these points in the South Quadrant, we saw incredibly dense pockets in the quadrant. And, at this point, we know that that's when compressive asphyxiation starts to occur. And that's sort of what we presented. And that is, in fact, actually just based on the autopsy reports, how these young people passed away. So I guess the main takeaway from this is that we started with open source information, right? Like, we started by looking through visuals online and trying to gather everything that we have, and then putting it together, and then creating a sync, and using observations and analysis. But then we also relied on more traditional reporting methods. When we reached out to families, we worked with researchers and scientists. So it really, I think we, at the Post at least, we've tried to meld, what we bring with the skills that other folks at the paper have to create our pieces.
It was incredible work, and the sophistication of the density analysis. And I just curious that we saw the lines moving on individuals. Those were, like, the physicists went through and tagged those, or you went through and tagged those?
Yeah, he went through and said, okay, this looks like a person. I'm going to follow their movement over the course of a couple of frames. And he did that for several people, and then random movements. And then Cedar said, okay, based on that, we can sort of see them all moving in the same direction.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Joyce. Okay, Brenna, I am going to share my screen whenever you are ready.
Thanks. Yeah, let's start with this one. So I have somewhat of a different job than Giancarlo and Joyce. I was even though I was kind of trained how they report now, I came to the Banner kind of with the mandate of trying to think about ways to do similar types of stories, but not around conflict reporting or breaking news tragedies always. And so trying to think about how to apply visuals as key investigative findings, and also doing investigative work with open source information at a local level. Which has been really amazing to have that be my job, especially doing it in just one city. There's not a lot of places doing that yet, but there's also a reason for that, because it's really hard. I'm learning. So it's been a privilege also to be learning kind of the extent to what I can do here, especially, I don't have, it's kind of just me right now doing this type of work at the Banner, hopefully more people soon, but I don't have, a lot of amazing graphics editors and video editors in a team yet, although I am regularly teaming up with a lot of amazing reporters at the Banner. It's been really interesting to try to see and stretch how this medium is done. And so one of the first two stories that I've done at the Banner that I think kind of fit the definition of what I'm going for actually revolve around social welfare benefits, which is not like an innately OSINT topic at all. But basically, I was on social media looking for stories and joining different Facebook groups in the Baltimore area. And I had found that a lot of people on this one Facebook group about homicides in Baltimore were talking about something called PBT and saying they hadn't gotten it yet, and they were very upset, and then linking to another Facebook group that at the time had now has over like 23,000 members. And it was all dedicated to this one social service in Maryland called Pandemic Electronic Benefits Transfer. And what that is that kids who used to get free school lunches at school when the pandemic happened, or when they were home with COVID or their schools were closed, didn't have access to those meals anymore. So the federal government decided to send money to those parents and have the state distribute that money. So in Maryland Social Services is supposed to be getting this money to parents, but there's this Facebook group of tens of thousands of parents saying they're either not getting the money or they're not even getting the cards to get the money. And so I decided to use this Facebook group to my advantage. I had a ton of people who obviously wouldn't be joining the Facebook group if they weren't upset, but were wanting to find answers to the service. So I put in a Google survey in there. I had questions. I asked if I could just get their name and information, if they could answer some questions for me. And I ended up getting almost 150 responses, verifying based on those respondents the theory of that this program is broken in the state and they're not getting their money like they were promised. So as I was going through and calling some of these parents who had filled out the Facebook form, I was speaking with one woman about it. Her name was Renee. And she on the phone goes, yeah, I'm having a lot of issues with PBT, but what I'm really having issues with is SNAP benefits. I had $3,000 in SNAP benefits stolen from me, and I don't know what to do. And so as she was talking more and more, she had said, she had that much money because the state had erroneously shut off her benefits earlier. So they gave her back pay for the months that she was off. And so within 2 weeks of her finally getting all her benefits back, they were all stolen and she was bereft. The state benefits theft has been a huge nationwide problem, but it's happening a lot in Maryland, and it's specifically bad in this state because DHS, social services, does not reimburse for stolen benefits in almost any circumstances, and they were not reimbursing Renee for hers. But she wasn't taking no for an answer. So she started going and calling all the stores where her benefits were used to try to figure out like what was going on. And at one of the stores, a clerk took pity on her and sent her a screenshot of their security camera footage of these people buying over $1,000 worth of baby formula with her benefits, because she had the exact amount down to the cent used and the exact time down to the millisecond when it was used from her transaction log, from Renee's own transaction log, looking at the benefits. So when she told me and sent me that screenshot, I initially got excited because there could be more visuals here. So then she and I got in a car and we drove to every single store where her benefits were used. And we just went in and asked for the footage. We learned that like most stores are not supposed to give it to us. So like one really nice store clerk snuck us into the back room, and I, videotaped it with my phone. And then at another time, we literally had to, we were in this small town called Seat Pleasant, and we were at a CVS. They wouldn't give it to us, but they said, oh, but if you bring a police officer with you, we'll give it to you. So we went to this police officer, and then they escorted us to the CVS, and they had their lights and everything. And then we went in, and then he got us the footage. But basically what we saw through the footage was it was the same people going and buying like cans and cans of baby formula at the same time for the same amount down to the cent as Renee's card was being used. So these visuals were key investigative findings. You wouldn't have found them online. You wouldn't have found them in the internet. You found them because we went and asked for them. So it is, technically a visual investigative story, right? But it's not cleanly OSINT. It's not cleanly publicly available information, which is something you see more and more in this space. And so we wrote a story about it. We wrote a story about Renee trying to navigate the system, trying to get her benefits back, still not getting her benefits back. And the unfortunate update to that story now is she still hasn't gotten her benefits back, though I am happy to say that she's in an appeals process through DHS to try to get her benefits back. And after the story came out, there's a lawyer at a local nonprofit who helps represent people in these cases, and she's now representing Renee. So hopefully she's able to recoup some of those benefits. And also, luckily, after this, a lot of readers donated to Renee. She had to get dental surgery. There was like a lot of stuff going on. And so she was actually able to help recoup some of those funds outside of that. So yeah, these were not months-long investigations or fancy geolocations that, is kind of the trademark of what I would say this field is known for. But it's kind of showing that how on a much smaller scale, you're still able to do impactful stories and unearth uncomfortable truths and do it in a way that's not just in conflict reporting.
Love that story, and that's a really good outcome. The donations that readers have been making. Crazy, the state still hasn't found a way to do something about it. So just a reminder and a plea: if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. Katie, are we Q&A or chat?
Either one is fine.
Either one, Q&A for the chat. And while we're waiting for that, I'll get started on a couple other things. So Brenna, we went from overseas to sort of a national investigation to a local investigation. And as you were saying, right, so much of the work in this space has been sort of conflict reporting focused. I know you have a lot of great stories that are going to be coming up too. So we don't want you to like scoop yourself totally here, but I'd love to hear from you. And if Joyce and Giancarlo have ideas for this too, what sort of opportunities do we think exist at the local level? And why has this been so hard, Brenna, as you mentioned?
Yeah, Sean's kind of flicking at something I told him earlier at the week. Was I was supposed to have this one story out that would have been like a much meatier investigation that's not now probably not going to come back to after the election. So anyway, sorry about that. But how I think about this space is that we're having a lot of really great models of kind of doing, I don't want to say the same types of stories because that's way too simplistic. It's about doing similar like topic stories, or at least in similar like events where it's either a reaction to huge breaking news or reaction to like major like tragedy and conflict, in a way where you're able to essentially reconstruct what happened to answer key questions of who did this or what went wrong, right? And I think that the biggest thing about open source reporting, about visual investigations that I think people get wrong is they think that it's about the tools that you have and like the weird technical skills you have to execute using those tools. And it's really not that. It's about mindset, and it's about how you think about stories and how you go about finding stories. And, I think that, for example, like the Facebook group story that I was talking about earlier that I done at the Banner, that's a story that so many amazing local journalists do all the time. While they'll use social media to go find stories, journalists do that all the time. I think it's the difference is, I think that kind of using those tools and those resources through social media and through sourcing that way in order to crack open more stories in different veins of stories, but also in making people kind of like become a detective with you and take you by the hand and experience how you're finding these things on your own. I think part of the reason that the work that Bellingcat and visual forensics like hits so well with audiences is because they're essentially kind of like a more sophisticated true crime version of journalism, where they're literally showing you findings instead of just, I feel like a lot of investigative journalism is telling you and not showing the like months of back end that'll go into a sentence. And I think that what this medium is doing differently is it's almost like bringing somebody along with you for the ride. And I think there's a lot of different ways to do that in journalism of any form, but especially in local journalism. And you don't have to have a fancy video, and you don't have to have, you know, all the tools, and I don't, and I'm still, you know, it's hard, but figuring out ways to do that I think is worthwhile and is also more representative of like the day and age we're living in with the internet.
Giancarlo or Joyce, anything to add to the local question?
You want to go, Joyce? Do you have anything? Go ahead.
You go for it.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I can make something up, but I mean, at Bellingcat, I think we're very much still at the, not at the local level of investigate. I mean, you know, if you follow Bellingcat's work, we're very much at sort of like the international level. You know, I could say, Brenna, at the beginning of the session tonight, you said, you know, I think you used the word groundbreaking, or you said something about like, you know, this kind of work is groundbreaking, right? And when I think about the fact that it is, but it is also something that's being adopted more widely by other organizations, I think that next frontier is definitely the local angle one. And so, you know, where open source digital investigations were 10 years ago at like the international level, I think that's where it is now for local reporting. So that's the new sort of frontier, I think. But, you know, Joyce, maybe you have something more substantive to say than that.
No, I want to echo what Giancarlo said, and I personally was thrilled when Brenna went to work for the Baltimore Banner, because I was like, I'm just so excited to see what Brenna would do in this space and see how she would pioneer like open source reporting and investigative reporting in the local level. So I am thrilled and glad that we all have this, like that we all get to witness this. But I think that, yeah, I agree, and I think it's super exciting because you like local reporting just brings so much more offer and so many different sensibilities to the table, and so much more like deep sources and on the ground reporting and like community investment. Like I think I am very curious to see how that will all play out. I feel like the most local story that my team has worked on is the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol, because we are the Washington Post. Like I live down the street from the Capitol, and so on and so forth. But in a lot of ways, that wasn't a local story. That was also a national story.
Yeah, they did win a Pulitzer for that, yes.
Yeah, so I think that's thank you. I think that's a question that we that, you know, I would be really keen to explore, where like if, you know, doing stories and much more not sort of parachuting into communities or sort of reporting on things from afar, but wondering how we can take the skills that we have and train that on the communities that we live in. I think is an exciting and really valuable path forward for this type of journalism.
So we're getting a ton of great questions from the audience, so I'll incorporate a couple of those. A lot of people seem to be interested in how you get started in this space. You know, it's not all about technical skills, right? But there are a pretty dizzying array of techniques that people are using. Like some people are doing JS and video editing and using social media. So Joyce, I guess maybe we can start with you here. For people who are looking to get into this work, what do you think a good pathway is?
So I guess it's a two-pronged approach for members of my team, at least. I think I just want to reiterate what Brenna had said earlier, that it really is a mindset and a way of thinking about things. So my original team, before we expanded, we all came from video production, video editing backgrounds. And so, what we were doing was just, just working in Adobe Premiere, the video editing software that the Post uses, like day in and day out. And we also have, and then we also have, one of our graphics reporter who had a degree in architecture and, had these different technical skills. And so we came together because we were all jointly interested in open source reporting. Like we were so fascinated and like in awe of what Bellingcat had done, their collaborations with BBC Africa, all these stories that were coming out that were really groundbreaking that we thought were really fascinating. And so I think for us, it was about like really like looking at the skills that we have in our toolkit and then figuring out ways that we could then join that with open source tools and techniques. And I think the great part about this is that, Giancarlo Bellingcat like offers trainings and it's just so openly available lessons online, like ways to learn and get into it. And I think we as a team really benefited from that as well. So for us, it was really just about being curious and wanting to do this kind of work and then looking at, our skills and saying, okay, how can we use that and how can we bring it together to make this happen? So it really, I think, was just about just trying to make things fit.
Brenna or Giancarlo, anything to add on for people interested in kind of jumping into this or career change?
Yeah, I think that I get asked a lot about how to keep track of all the tools you can use and all the different things available to you to learn. And I do think that the best way to get good at this is to practice. There are so many amazing resources, Bellingcat being probably the best. Well, definitely the best to like learn how to do geolocation, to get practice problems in there. It truly is just a muscle to flex. But then beyond that, when you're using different tools to like sleuth online and different ways to go about that, I would say that you would drive yourself crazy trying to take the same approach you would to like geolocating with satellite imagery to other open source research techniques because there's just so many tools out there. I think truly, and this is for so much of journalism, but the best way to learn is to have a problem you're trying to solve. And a lot of that too can be asking for help. I bother, OSINT people in the OSINT community all the time. When I know that I'm not an expert in something, I will go and ask so many other people for help. And I think there's also ways to do that. Like, for example, like for different geolocations, when I was at the Times and we would do stuff, like I would ask my colleagues all the time, oh, it's a puzzle to solve. So how did you figure this out? And they would ask me how I figured stuff out. And, I know that after this, I'm going to be DMing Giancarlo right away to have him explain one more time how he just did the geolocation in Ethiopia. And so I think that making it a conversation, being really clear on what you're looking for, and also not trying to be perfect and not trying to just do it to find a solution, but doing it to like focus on the process, because that's how you really learn, will be what will set you up for success.
Giancarlo, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say, just reiterate points that we've heard from Joyce and Brenna here. Don't worry about, so Brenna, you said it perfectly at the beginning that if you're brand new to this, the terminology alone can make it seem like, oh my God, these people are all geniuses and I can't do that. Essentially, the job is being able to Google stuff is what is like 99% of the job is like, I have a question. I don't know the answer. I don't know if it's possible to do this. Let me Google and see if I can find the answer, right? Or like as Brenna's saying, like, I don't know how to do this. Is it possible? Let me ask this person on Twitter because I see that they talk about this a lot. So maybe they know, right? So a lot of the job is just like being able to Google. So being curious, having a question, and just literally going like, oh, I wonder, like, is there a way to, maybe I could sync up these videos, or like, is there a way that I could calculate like the time maybe based on the shadows? Just having questions and being able to Google effectively is the start. So don't be intimidated by the terminology. Don't be intimidated by any of the techniques that you see displayed. It's all curiosity. And the last point I'll make really quick is that at Bellingcat, we really, really, really passionately believe that anyone can learn how to do this. You don't have to, again, I'll repeat it. I don't have any journalism training. I've been learning on the job, and we train people all the time who come from all different walks of life. You can learn these skills. As Joyce was saying, these resources are online. Most of the time they're free. So all you need is curiosity. And again, just like the ability to Google effectively, I guess.
So, some of you have mentioned people have like architectural training, there's GIS stuff. Giancarlo, I think you're getting your PhD in, I can't remember, something really smart.
Criminology.
I guess what I'm wondering too is, and we have people who are probably watching who aren't just coming out of a journalism background. Are there other disciplines that you look to when you're trying to think of, I want to solve this problem? I wonder if architecture has anything to say about that. And one thing I'm thinking here too, as you were doing that sort of in Ethiopia, trying to line up the images and stuff, I kept thinking, God, I feel like I've seen this in like Jason Bourne movies. And so how much of like, I'm sure there's interesting work in this space being done in the intelligence community, and wondering if any of that like bleeds out into your methodology ever at some point.
Was that for, should I go first?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I'll start with the end there. So, right, even the term OSINT, which is the term you might be familiar with, has the word intelligence, right? Open source intelligence in it. So at Bellingcat, our position, our stance is that, going back to Brenna's point earlier, anything that kind of like mystifies the work, anything that sets up barriers between the reader and the researcher, we tend to avoid. And I think OSINT is one of those terms, precisely because we want to distance ourselves from intelligence agencies, right? So at Bellingcat, like journalists are not spies, and right. So at Bellingcat, we distance ourselves from that kind of work. And so, yeah, I know that intelligence agencies employ these techniques, but I wouldn't say that we look to them necessarily as guides. It's infinitely more the case that people on Twitter who are just online a lot and who are innovating new ways of, as you're saying, like calculating shadow lengths to figure out when a video was taken, or who are really good at geolocation, and they come up with new ways to use like Google Street View, for example, to do that kind of work. They're much more influential. And, I couldn't tell you what field most of them work in, because a lot of these accounts are anonymous. So one of the cool things about the open source community is like anonymity is cool. You can be totally anonymous and be super influential in the community. So I can list a whole bunch of people that whose work I truly admire, and I have no idea if they're, how old they are or where they live, because they're truly anonymous. So yeah, who knows what fields they come from, but.
Makes me think of the BuzzFeed a couple of years ago in a Pulitzer for a story on internment camps, right? And I think one of the principal contributors to that was an architect by training, just not a journalist at all. I love that story. Joyce or Brenna, any places you look for inspiration, or other disciplines that you think have interesting things to contribute?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say also just like holistically for any personal journalist, or like for you to yourself, like the reason I have been able to do anything in this space, or the reason why, I met Giancarlo or Joyce originally, was because I wasn't a journalist, and I just had a really weird specialty in cryptocurrency and illicit financial investigations. And I had, spent time in college and doing internships and different jobs that was my job to do that. And that's how I eventually started doing trainings with Bellingcat specific to crypto investigations. But then because I was there, I was able to also like start to learn geolocation stuff and begin your skill set that way. And it was kind of my Trojan horse essentially into this profession. And I feel like a lot of times we talk about journalism as like, if you're a good writer, you're set. You're good. And that's kind of true and also not true. And I feel like the things that make you the best in journalism are the things that other journalists don't have. So but the things that journalists always do already is like, when you don't know something, you try to go find an expert to talk to about that, which just think about it the same way. But instead of just asking the expert for a quote, ask the expert to actually show you their process, which I think visual forensics is really incredible at doing, and then showing in their reporting as well. But I think just for yourself personally, if you have an accounting background, if you have a criminology background, if you speak a really specific language, different things like that, like the thing that makes you different or the thing that you might have that doesn't neatly, you think, fit into journalism is actually something that can probably be applied in the space and also be something that can help you maybe break into the OSINT space and begin to do things like that in it. So yeah.
We welcome you in journalism. Everybody come over. Joyce, so we're running out of time here. You get the last word if there's anything you wanted to add.
No, I think what I really want to echo is that just ask each other, experts, friends, whomever, like reach out, ask questions. I think that is one of the wonderful things about the open source community. And I think the other thing that I really like that Brenna and Giancarlo touched on is that there are so many different ways of getting at information that you might be curious about, and there are so many different disciplines and skills that you can draw from as well. And so I think that it really shouldn't be limited to folks of a certain training or background, but that we all bring different skills to the table, and that's what makes the work exciting and creative and wonderful.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you to the audience for coming tonight. Really learned a ton listening to you also. Thank you. Katie, is there anything you want to add before we end?
No, I just echo you, Sean, and thanking our panelists, Brenna, Joyce, Giancarlo. I know I certainly learned a lot. I hope everyone in the audience did as well. And just thank you everyone for attending. Again, we will have a link to the full session up on the Merrill College YouTube channel. So if you did miss it or you want to share with anybody, that will be available. So thank you again, everyone. Have a good evening.